welcome back to Psychedelics Weekly. Joe Moore and David Drapkin here. How are you today, David?
Doing good, Joe. Yeah, doing really good. Spring's here. Like, I've been taking a few walks around where I live in Jersey, and yeah, daffodils, crocuses, loving it. I love spring.
That's great. Yeah, the vernal equinox. Is it equinox or solstice? I kind of forget the two.
The equinox is equal between light and darkness. I think that's where equi comes in. So yeah. So I guess that means it's a solstice in that case, because it wasn't an equinox. Yeah.
Yeah. Did they teach a little bit of Latin in public school in the UK?
In England, yeah. Well, my initial school, we had a Latin class, but the teacher had a drinking problem, and he literally just let us do whatever we wanted and gave us money just to like not tell anyone. I never told my parents this, but yeah, like literally, like, okay, you want to make a Roman fort today? Go ahead. Here's some materials and here's chocolate. Go ahead, kids, and then see you in an hour. That was it.
Wow. All right, I didn't get any kind of free pass like that in school, but that's kind of interesting. Yeah, the equi thing made me think of that. So, all right, let's dig in. Well, I guess, yeah, where I'm at, I'm in Los Angeles right now, downtown. We're doing a small little event Saturday. And then I think, I did just get back from Seattle this past weekend. Saw some frost, saw some beautiful temperatures there. It's actually surprisingly similar climate today and yesterday in Seattle and Los Angeles. So curious. Maybe a little more humid up there in Seattle, but gorgeous all over the place. Found an amazing bookstore called Mortlake and Company. Are you familiar with Mortlake? Does that word sound familiar?
No.
It's right outside
London.
No,
I've never heard of it.
I'll get into it eventually. It's a whole like rabbit hole for me. Someday we can do an episode on it. All right. Anyway, let's dig in. So before we do articles, let's talk about Adam Strauss. Friend Adam Strauss has something really cool coming up. So if you're looking for an entertaining way to explore the power of psychedelics, you won't want to miss The Mushroom Cure, a one-of-a-kind psychedelic theatrical experience that Michael Pollan calls brilliant, hilarious, and moving. Written and performed by Adam Strauss, The Mushroom Cure tells the true story of Adam's quest to cure his OCD with psychedelics. It's a hilarious and heartwarming story that New York Times says mines a great deal of laughter from disabling pain. With humor, honesty, and a touch of magic, this play will leave you inspired and moved. This play will take place on April 7th and 8th at the Santa Monica Playhouse in Santa Monica, California. Don't miss this opportunity to be a part of a unique and enlightening experience. We'll have ticket links in the show notes, so check that out. Have you ever seen Adam perform? Like, I have a few times, and he's so funny. Like,
yeah,
really
I went
honesty.
to Psychedelic Assembly in Manhattan, and he was kind of emceeing and performing. I love him to bits. We actually had a chat afterwards because I have OCD as well. So we talked about it, and like, particularly for me, like, what was it like growing up as a young kid with OCD, and the battles inside my head of like how to try and control it, and that kind of fed it and made it even worse, and then just driving me even more mad. And how, I was going to talk about it actually in our first article about cannabis, so I can open up more about how cannabis has helped me with my OCD, to be honest. But yeah, lovely bloke, real great sense of humor.
He's so funny and really just kind. And I'm excited to eventually connect with him more. I don't know that I'll be at his show in Santa Monica, but if you guys are around, please do check it out. And we've got a really cool new course coming up, the Psychedelic and Neuroscience course with Melanie Pincus and Manesh Gurn. Is that right?
Yeah. So two psychedelic neuroscientists. It's all about demystifying psychedelics and the brain, and why do we need to learn about it? What do we learn that's relevant and that we kind of put into practice? So it's not just theory. So we did a webinar, we just did a podcast together. It's going to be an awesome course. Just to tell folks, it starts May 17th, and it's an 8-week live talk course. So it's weekly Zooms of an hour and a half with Melanie and Manesh, plus 10 hours of recordings. And if you apply by April 12th, then you get $100 off. And I've always been interested in the brain. It's just phenomenal how incredible the brain is, how complex it is, how much we don't know about it. And I've always struggled to think, like, what do I do with it? Like, how do I put this into practice with my own life, with my own mental health, and then with working with clients? So this course has been designed to answer those questions. Yeah.
So if you're really curious about this and feel like it would really help you understand psychedelics more, please do check it out. Melanie and Manesh are both great instructors. So yeah, check them out. I kind of want to sneak myself into the course as well. Just really catch up on neuroscience. I'm quite negligent. I've been catching up reading stuff like Stephen Kotler, Jamie Wheel, Huberman Lab, things like that. But there's, it's always good to get the fundamentals taken care of and dig in a little further. Yeah, so you can check that out at psychedeliceducationcenter.com, folks. And yeah, all right, let's dig into some articles, David. First one here, Cannabis is a Psychedelic with Dr. Julie Holland. This was originally on the Cannabis Investing Podcast. I think they recorded this maybe at South by Southwest. But it was an interesting thing. I really wish I'd listened to the podcast instead of read the transcript, but it was still really really nice. I really appreciate Julie's perspective most of the time. Did you get anything out of this one?
Yeah, the article itself, it goes in a few different directions, but the first few paragraphs is about cannabis. The rest of it kind of goes off in many directions about the psychedelic ecosystems. But, I think Julie's someone that's really always said that cannabis is a psychedelic. It is mind manifesting. It has been used for a long time all over the world by many traditions. And her husband calls it the people's psychedelic. And I think that's also what Steve D'Angelo calls it. And that's how I relate to it as well. Like, I grew up with cannabis, as a teenager, and it's been part of my life ever since in different forms of the relationship. And yeah, I was going to say, I was just mentioning having OCD. So I've got an internalizing form where I repeat words and with certain kind of letter patterns of consonants and vowels and certain number of letters in the word, literally thousands of times a day, constantly, and I still do it. So when I was first started that, it became so traumatizing and hard to know how to function whilst repeating all these words that I found that cannabis just really helped to kind of turn it off. And I've had that recently, that cannabis is in a sense an off switch, but it's also an on switch where I become just much more grounded in my body. Like, I feel the energy of my body. I think the endocannabinoid system kind of lights up through all my different systems and organs. And I am just so happy that I can now legally use cannabis. It's part of my life. I think it is a gateway drug to deeper healing, to deeper understanding, and potentially to psychedelics. But it is not a gateway drug to things like heroin. I would much rather we were sharing cannabis than alcohol, to be honest. Yeah,
absolutely. And chatting with Kyle, he's been approaching cannabis this way for a long time as well, from a psychedelic perspective. I met a guy, I think in 2008 in Boston. Older gentleman than me. He, longtime ayahuasca user. He had a weekly practice of high dose cannabis solo in a dark room, just sitting in a chair. So kind of like a Vipassana, a psychedelic assisted Vipassana, really. And I've always found that astonishing. And, it doesn't take much to really convince us that these things can be that powerful. A couple too many milligrams of edibles and we're having a really novel experience. I had another one this weekend. I think I ate 40 milligrams, thinking it's what I needed to go to bed, and woke up the next morning still going at it for hours. And it was definitely an altered thing, right? It's not being dumber. There's just a lot more sensation, a lot more experience that you can pull out of it. It's a good one. And Daniel McQueen famously with his medicinal mindfulness, and I think there's a few other schools doing this now. And Rachel Carvalli with Ganjasana yoga, cannabis-assisted yoga practice. So there's all sorts of really good stuff out there with cannabis, and I'm glad Julie kind of mentions this because people don't necessarily think of it that way, but we should. And I think Daniel McQueen called it a Trojan horse, the psychedelic Trojan horse. All of a sudden, this really incredible psychedelic compound has been legalized in a lot of states, and most of the country at the state level here. Is it legal in Israel yet? Recreationally?
It's only legal if you get it prescribed. So only kind of medical quite a lot of people get it prescribed for PTSD,
Mm-hmm.
which is very common over there. But
What
I
do you
do
think your
think
odds are
cannabis.
with it getting a prescription in Israel?
Yeah, I need to look into that. Do I have PTSD? That's what you're asking. I don't know.
I don't know.
think
Like,
if I
is that the only qualifying condition?
no, I think I think you can have chronic pain and a few other things. But yeah, I think definitely if we dug deep enough into David's brain
Mm-hmm.
and recesses of my existence, it would be interesting to see what we could put down on paper. But yeah, I'm definitely intending when we move to Israel in the summer, everyone, that's where we're headed to.
Mm-hmm.
That yeah, that's part of my life. It just is going to be a bit different because here in Jersey, yeah, it's legal now. You can smoke it and walk around and yeah, there's different dosages. I just think there's so much to the cannabis plant that is majestic and beautiful and mystical we don't yet understand. Just looking at, say, CBD, CBG, CBN, and all the terpenes and the different combinations, and it's just so much there that I think in the next 20 years we're going to learn. And I actually wanted to mention there's a new Vital student that signed up. I am so happy he joined us. He has been studying Ayurvedic cannabis for I think 15 years, spent I think 9 years living in India. And he does presentations about, what in India is called kind of bang, and he's sometimes called Siddhi and Vijaya. And I really feel like cannabis it has this transpersonal aspect to it that enables us to come into contact with our shadow and to kind of, experience more, mystical, spiritual states. And it can be great for relationships as well, and just hanging out with people. It's a nice gateway to walk through into more mystical states and more, authentic states of being.
Yeah, there's a lot there, and I do think it's a really, really safe compound, safer than most pharmaceuticals for most folks, and I think there's just so much there, right? Like people can start cannabis and drop a number of prescriptions regularly, and I think dropping, when you have 10 prescriptions, if you can drop half of those, that's a really good move. Most of the time, if you can do it safely with a doctor's permission and help, for instance. But yeah, I think it's something we should definitely dig into. I had no idea about the Ayurvedic cannabis, but it makes sense. Cannabis has been used in the Indian tradition for a very long time. It's traditional in Chinese medicine as well. A long history of Islamic cultures, Middle Eastern cultures using cannabis. I think there was cannabis found in Egyptian pharaohs' tombs. And I heard rumor, I don't know if this is accurate, this is kind of Graham Hancocky, but I heard rumor that there was a bunch of cannabis found in New World, either Mayan or Aztec ruins as well. So it's just fascinating. Yeah. Did you listen to that Graham Hancock episode, by the way?
Yeah, the one that you did was awesome. Loved it. That must have been fun.
Oh my gosh, I was delusionally ill, but I'm glad it worked out. I'm pretty obsessed with that guy's work, so it was really amazing to be able to pull that off.
Yeah, just the idea that he puts across that we don't know a lot about our planet that we've been living on, and so it seems to be because we don't know it, we've kind of just made up these theories that seem comfortable and easy to accept, but they may not well be true, or they may just be part of the truth, and there's a much deeper truth that we just haven't tapped into yet. Right.
Yeah. We got a long way to go. A friend actually just linked me he's got a new theory in a paper he's working on. It's calling it the 5% limit, and it's something along the lines of like based on our sensory apparatus, only about 5% of the universe is knowable. So as a result, there's always going to be 95% mystery going on. Yeah, It's fascinating. I'm hopeful to link up with him this week in LA and see if we can't explain that to our listeners here. So, anything else big? Like Julie in this episode or article had some concerns around abuse and how predatory behavior might be the biggest risks to the industry. Not so much like sharkish biotech companies. I find it interesting, right? And she made a really good point. It's not just psychedelic therapy, everybody. It's regular psychotherapy, pediatricians, priests, religious professionals, people in schools. So like abuse happens just about everywhere, but how do we contextualize it appropriately so we can seemingly make sense of abuse in psychedelic spaces? This is one of the reasons why I'm really pro decriminalization, pro going further, buying it in stores, so that we can actually write Yelp reviews of people quite openly. Yes, I did work with Jimmy. Jimmy was not a great facilitator. I don't think anybody should go there. He made me feel sexually very, very unsafe. Things like that could be in Yelp reviews, right? Like right now, given the legal status, we can't talk about it in the underground. And the above ground's not even here yet, really. There's a little bit of ketamine. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on this whole abuse thing?
I definitely agree. It's one of the biggest factors that we haven't resolved, and we haven't even started to really think about it. Ultimately, in a few years' time, we'll have some kind of board that kind of measures training standards and competence, and we'll get licensed and credentialed through them. But is that going to fit everyone's cup of tea? Is it not everyone's going to go down that pathway? Not all people are going to want a clinician or practitioner that's gone through that training. So then we also need, a little bit, I think, another medium for people to express those concerns, like a Yelp directory. Because there are people out there, like I'm hearing stories, all over the place of shamans and healers that are not ethical, that have been abusive. And I think we need a kind of remedial kind of reconciliation process around it, and just to keep people safe. Like, because a lot of people are really vulnerable and don't know what to expect, because it's often their first time and it's happening in the underground. So it's hard to tell people about what they're doing or what happened to them. So we need a lot more guardrails put in. And I think the people listening to this, and we're the best place to speak to it, because we've been part of this, for a long time. And so who are the folks that really we can lean on and trust in their experience, and can they all get along? And I think that's one of the things we've got a problem with right now, is kind of a little bit factionalism about not one person's got the right answers, but we need to bring a lot of different people together to think, how do we keep people safe here? And there's got to be a number of different organizations that's built out that can do that, and just a basic set of standards, like about core competence and kind of ethical principles and guidelines. What's okay, what's not okay. Particularly around touch, that is the biggest thing. So we teach about that, and there's a few scenarios that you could work with a client around touch, pre-medicine, talking it through, making an agreement. It's just hard to get the message across to the thousands of people doing underground work right now, and in just ketamine clinics right now, and in doctors' offices right, in hospitals right now, about what is ethical. I think we've got a long way to go in that one.
Yeah, I guess I struggle with this idea of these things are really intuitively ethical or unethical for a lot of folks. Like, don't touch people without consent of some kind or another, right? Don't do sexual stuff in session. And what's tough here is that a lot of people just don't have the same fundamental understanding and theories. So we're dealing with like a really diverse set of beliefs. Like we've had some really, I watched a cult documentary recently. What was it called? Orgasm Incorporated, about kind of this interesting sex cult in San Francisco. I knew a lot of people that were peripheral to it in Boulder when I was living there. And I was like, that's weird, curious, but that's weird. It turns out later it was like a really, really intense cult situation. And it made intuitive sense to a lot of these, ostensibly sexually liberated folks. So the baggage, the dogmas didn't, and the abuses didn't really seem to be the red flag, because the whole thing intuitively made so much sense. So I think people just have like a lot of, they're still out there. Just because there's a Netflix documentary doesn't mean they're gone, right? So like this ideology is still out there, and I'm sure there's good portions of the psychedelic community that were in the loop there. So how do we kind of, work towards something that makes people feel safe, but at the same time, not piss people off so much that they go off and go rogue forever, right? I think that's one of the biggest issues with how mean we are as a scene. Like, we're not very kind as a culture when people disagree with us. We need to figure out kindness and trust, not just bullying people on the internet to conform to the way you want them to act, right? And then have it be part of a longer conversation. That said, there's going to be situations where people are just really bad actors. We've played part of that in that as well. And it sucks. It's not a really good time. But yeah, this whole sexual abuse thing is a big topic that we need to really get sorted and look at. And if we can't talk about this stuff openly and there's still secrets, then that's what breeds risk and danger. So
yeah,
that's where I'm going to lean on the feds and like state level policy upgrades so that we can have these conversations more publicly and try to improve safety.
Yeah, and just as a final thought, the Fireside Project's got a support line, and I don't know whether they take calls of people that have had difficult experiences with trip sitters and shamans and guides, but I'm sure they probably are collecting some kind of data on that, because they've had a lot of calls now. I think we're gonna have a podcast soon, I hope, with the folks from Fireside. So I feel like I've worked in child protection. We're going off a tangent here, but I've worked in child protection where calls are made about parents or teachers, and they log them in a system, in a central registry, and it might not meet a threshold to say, okay, we're going to go and take the children away or go and arrest them, but they take that log, and so the next time someone else calls up a month later or a year later, it can say, this is a third call we'd had about this guy. I think it's time to do something about it. Let's go make a visit. So something like that, is what we have from a child protection perspective or a licensing board. Yeah, we need something like that.
And how do we get there is the question I always come up with. And I don't know, because there has to be a lot of interagency, interorganizational trust. And then also the idea that any record you take could be subpoenaed by the federal government and get people in trouble, or state government likely too. And then what do you do there? And then say you sell your business and all of a sudden some public company has all this really crazy private info. It's not great either. So we've got to think long term about like data structure, privacy, not going too far with it. And like what actual kind of steps do you have to actually enforce things? Like at what point do you call the police? At what point do you notify other industry people? Yeah, it's a big question. We don't have really great answers, I think is the way to put it. Yeah.
Not yet. Stay tuned. All right.
So next up, our friends over at the cbc.ca have an article here. First Nations researcher exploring psychedelics as healing tool for intergenerational trauma. This is a project going on at Vancouver Island University in British Columbia, Canada. And they're hoping to establish a psychedelic research center focused on studying the therapeutic potential of psilocybin and MDMA. I think Georgia Martin is the co-lead at the center, and Martin's planning to use the two-eyed seeing approach, which combines Western-style science and Indigenous perspectives. Did you take anything interesting from this article, David?
Yeah, I've heard amazing things about Vancouver Island University, VIU. So when I read this article, I was like, yes, that's exactly what they said they were going to do, and now they've done it. So I'm really happy. I had a chat last year. I don't know if you know Shannon Dames. She's actually been announced as the chair of this psychedelic-assisted education and research program. Yeah, she's amazing. I think she's a nurse. We had 1 or 2 chats last year. And she was saying, this is in the pipeline, and I think it's really important, particularly in Canada and definitely in British Columbia, the First Nations people are are more involved in healthcare, in systems that are being built out there. They have a seat at the table. They're consulted. They're respected. Generally speaking, I'm not an expert by any means in anything up there at all, but just from what I've been led to understand, it's more just part of society. I've lived in New Zealand as well, where the Maori culture is so much more woven into society and culture. The language is taught in schools. So I just think it's a bit more like that in Canada, and British Columbia in particular. So I think it's wonderful just to in a sense supplement the Western medical model with this more in kind of indigenous, social, cultural, spiritual model that includes ceremony, rites of passage, and kind of, you know, more wisdom traditions. Because I feel like a lot of our pathology is caused by the medicalization of the self, of the human being, and we've lost contact with what makes us, miraculous, holy, and mystical. So I think that's why psychedelics play such a different role to SSRIs or benzos, because we're actually returning to the source, and at the source there is pain and trauma and shadow, as well as other aspects of light as well. So I love seeing this kind of thing, and they're going to do some cool research, especially into life distress, Alzheimer's, fibromyalgia, and they're going to do a trial we're using ketamine to treat PTSD in firefighters. So brilliant stuff. I just love it.
There's another piece here. They're going to examine the social, cultural, and historical context of these substances, as well as the ethical considerations around their use. I'll just remind folks, ethics, like what definitions are we using? Are we talking about professional ethics, where it's kind of a set of rules and guidelines for a profession, aka guild rules? Or are we talking like how people should be operating in the world? And then where does that come from? Like, where's your foundation when you start talking about ethics? I think it's really important for us to have like a really solid ground when we discuss ethics, not just this is the way to be nice. Like, this is the way to follow the golden rule. It's like, well, we want some really solid foundations for the golden rule, in my opinion, before we kind of base everything on it. It's just my little jab. Whenever I see the ethics word, I have to say that. It's always a hot button issue for me.
Yeah, and maybe an answer to that is through combining the Western version of medical ethics with more indigenous, traditional, social, cultural, spiritual ethics. That makes it a little bit more expansive, and not kind of less one-dimensional, perhaps. Because I think medical ethics is all based around, obviously safety, but kind of liability and kind of covering your own arse, so you don't get sued. So that's not ethics, that isn't ethics. That's something else, trying to not be sued by somebody. Right.
Right. I remember I was talking to somebody about setting up like a fake tarot booth at a festival, just to give out like fake readings and to mess with people a little bit and like have some laughs. Somebody comment, because it'd be really funny, especially if you make it way over the top. It's like obvious I'm not a professional tarot reader. And that is so unethical. Was the response. And I'm like, well, I don't know. It's really fucking funny though. So, so like what is, it's the idea of ethics is something, even if you're a professional ethicist with a PhD in ethics, like I think you understand what I'm saying here. Just that's all. Something we need to really think about. Cool.
Yeah, and just your example there, Joe, like you got other people's opinions on it. Like, what do you think about this idea? And internally you were kind of, chewing it over. Let me think about this. So that's ethics. It's like you're consulting and then you're doing like a real inner directed process of like, why do I want to do this? I want to make people happy. I want to make them laugh. I want to make people not to take things so seriously. Okay, how do I do that in an ethical way? Or stretch what kind of ethics we're talking about here.
And then I think Kyle and I worked with Lenny Gibson to write this paper a little bit ago. The idea was ethics and the drug war. We eventually just turned it into a whole piece on the history of the drug war, removing the idea of ethics from it. So we were like, what the hell is ethics? And we had to read Aristotle. And I think the idea was, what is the sweet spot balance between self and culture, self and polis at that point? Which a relatively small city makes a little more sense. But for the now we have to say, are we doing it for our city, state, country, planet? galaxy, universe? Like what is that sweet spot balance that we're coming from when we're approaching a problem? I think that's the money. That's where the rubber meets the road. Cool. So next up, this one's a little short. This is the first time I've seen this, so that's kind of why I wanted to bring it up, David. BizNow, BISNOW.com. And nothing short of incredible, investors look to form REIT to buy real estate for psychedelic therapy. REIT is a real estate investment trust. So a group of investors co-own a bunch of real estate together and can rent it to psychedelic clinics. So they do this with apartments and homes now. It's a good way to, imagine only owning 4 apartment buildings or something, or like 2 apartments, and like for 9 months, one of your apartments is unrented. So you're kind of getting into like a really tough situation financially. You might go bankrupt. Here you're collectivizing with a bunch of other people and providing services at a higher scale, hoping for more occupancy and less problems at scale. But this is actually something that solves a really big problem, right? Like we've seen this in Oregon. People would need, I think, the mortgage to be fully paid off before being able to operate in Oregon, because we're breaking federal law and loans go through the federal government, and we don't want to be at risk there, right? So immediately a real estate investment trust could provide real estate for clinical operators or operators in Oregon, and ketamine operators, and Colorado is soon going to have some of this coming up. But did you take anything from this one?
Oh, Joe, what do I say, mate? I'm going to go with that bit of me that just thinks, what is this all about? And is it going to help people? From what you just said, maybe it will. But there's a bit of me that just thinks it's, just another way to make money in the psychedelic space. But I do appreciate, it's hard to get 100% money down, to buy a property, which you need in psychedelics and cannabis. It's really hard to get insurance. It's hard to meet all those kind of regs that you need to get a licensed building for cannabis and psychedelics. So if it really is helping people, then I guess I'm just worried it's going to, the way that it's set up is probably going to be a bit extractive. And so as long as it's not an extractive capitalist kind of ploy, it really is just enabling practitioners, kind of local leaders, to more accessibly, scale their practice or take on new clinicians. I'm down for it. But ultimately, where does the profit go to? I'd like to know more of the details about this kind of thing. So it's good it's in my site now. I've never heard of a real estate investment trust before. And I'm also keeping in mind, Field Trip is now pretty much bankrupt. I think 3 of their 10 clinics are currently open. Ketamine Wellness Center's 12 clinics have closed. So there's something that is very difficult about managing ketamine clinics. So doesn't REIT help or not? I don't know. But one thing I do know, this is only going to apply to above ground clinics, not to, underground practitioners. The jury's out for me on the details.
So extractive is the term you used, right? Like any kind of for-profit industry wants to extract profits, right? Because you need those so that you can keep operating and then also make a profit, so it's worth doing. So like this will be on the New York Stock Exchange. So it's like very profit motivated. And I think Cody from Ambria Capital, and then Ty Zakovich, president and CEO of Healing REIT, they're doing this together. I think that's smart to have people like that. But it's like, there's no way around that real estate's not a big part of this conversation. Like we do need spaces to operate. And the question to me, David, is like, how aggressive is the pricing structure going to be? Is it going to feel fair to the clinic operators? I think yes. Like people won't, if it's better than straight up buying a property, people will probably lean towards it because you're going to have to show up with somewhere between $500,000 to $8 million, depending on the site you want to use, right? So if they've done all that work and it's kind of a turnkey operation, if there's vacancy, like that makes more clinics able to operate quicker. I've heard about this model working really well in cannabis. People that are just, that's all they do is rent property to cannabis businesses. And it seems all right. You know, people keep their relationship for many years. That said, right now they're going to have a first mover advantage where they're the only show in town. So how competitive are they going to have to be is another big question. So we could analyze it all day, right? Is it a good thing? At least they got the ball rolling. Like this is, in my opinion, very essential to fostering our industry, making our industry work better. So I'm happy they're doing it, and I hope there comes some competition to the table, so they have to play against them. Yeah. So without competition, you're unchecked.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Joe. I go through, phases of being more or less cynical, more or less kind of angry and anti-capitalist.
Same.
So yeah, I'm definitely in the more kind of angry or anti-capitalist phase of life at the moment. Maybe just seeing what's been happening, with, like I said, Field Trip, Ketamine Wellness Centre, Synthesis, just thinking, a lot of people are being affected by that. And there's reasons why that didn't go well that hopefully, that we can learn from. I'm really interested in the idea of more of a cooperative or a group practice of different practitioners kind of using a space together. But again, how are they going to get the money to put down there and insurance and kind of liability? So if there's a one-stop shop that can maybe help with some more of that, like how to set up your, medical record system, how to handle HR, billing, all of those things. And here's your rent, here's your insurance, you're good to go, bang. That would be great. Just to really make it easier for the thousands of amazing people out there working in psychedelics and helping people that use psychedelics so they can just do what they do best. So yeah, if it does that, then welcome.
I hear that. So it's a good one. The idea of collectivization, I think, is something that should be explored. I have a friend who was an amazing physical therapist working in a hospital environment and really just didn't like it, and split off and formed a co-op with like 12 offices in just doing physical therapy. And I think that's a model that therapists could use. I think there is some people working on that kind of idea elsewhere, perhaps in something like Jamaica, where it's turnkey. I had this idea. I was hyping it for a few years, but 5-6 years ago, hoping people would pick it up and run with it. But I don't know. Like we'll see. So there's a lot of room for a lot of different ideas like this, and I think the idea like this lowers the capital requirements for operators substantially. So I think this would work really well with a collective of therapists, because you wouldn't need to come up with cash to purchase, right? You could just have a straight up lease.
Yeah. And I guess if the rent is fair market rate and comparable, that's great. Then it wouldn't make too much difference.
Yeah. And the comparison is like, you'd have to run different math from like, what would a mortgage cost? It's like more like the math is how much would you need to, depending on the type of business, right? How much would you need to buy this property out in order to operate in Oregon or Colorado or however that's going to work in Colorado? Yeah. But for ketamine, it's obviously really different. It's like competitive with, like the cost to build out a clinic on your own dime. So next up, this one's a little more fun. Diplo says he ran a marathon while on LSD. Experts say he's tripping. Interesting. USA Today episode.
You heard of Diplo? I've never heard of him. He's a DJ or
he's kind of a big time EDM guy. A lot more mainstream. Oh, yeah. So you'd see him at really big festivals in Las Vegas, things like that. I may have seen him once. I don't really remember. Though he always does some interesting kind of, drop-in things. on YouTube shows and Instagram. I remember watching some YouTube show from Dan, I think, what was it? Fuck, That's Delicious, I think it was the show. And they the episode opens with 3 dudes waking up in Diplo's bed, one of them being Diplo, and they go to his fridge and they find LSD gummy bears in his fridge. And he's like, yep. For whatever reason, I always thought he was super anti-drug, but I've not been able to figure out why I thought that. But yeah, like this, it's interesting, right? This article kind of drove me nuts. I know a lot of ultra runners, and I know a lot of people that do really long distance hiking, like the Canada to Mexico thing, for instance. Like they love being out on the trail for 4 or 5 months. LSD plays a big role for a lot of these folks. And they just love it. There's like analgesic properties. Your feet won't hurt you for the day, maybe, more focus, a little more energy. You don't get as tired. Diplo did 5 drops in the article. There's no uniform dose, so we don't know how much he ate or drank. But somebody's like, I don't know what his intent was. I don't know why he would do this, because there's no clear clinical data. But it's like, well, you're ignoring how the real world makes decisions when you say stuff like that. I forget. Do you remember who the scientist was they communicated with?
No, don't remember that one.
Yeah, drove me a little nuts.
But yeah, this is USA Today, so it's it's really kind of mainstream article. So
yeah, said he beat Oprah's time. I think that was the brag I saw in one headline. So he did like 3 hours.
Yeah, he did it in 3
minutes.
hours 35 minutes.
It's pretty good.
So
LA marathon.
There's a
New
photo.
York, not New York marathon. Okay.
That's brilliant. Yeah. I did one when I was 21. My only marathon. It took me, I think, 4 hours and 15 minutes. That wasn't with much practice. Yeah, he's in great shape. There's a photo of him there, with his top off, and yeah, he's in really good shape as well. So it wasn't just the LSD that made him complete the marathon. It was also being in really good shape and practicing a lot, I think.
Yeah, the second part of that YouTube show, they were in the gym the whole time. It showed his workout routine. So it's like, yeah, dude's working out a lot. So the guy that made those comments was Greg Fonzo, the co-director of the Center for Psychedelic Research and Therapy at UT Austin. So Texas's biggest research program. Yeah, I want to read this quote. Fonzo adds that it is not clear what his motivation was for taking LSD prior to running a marathon, because there is currently no rigorous or substantial evidence to suggest that LSD or psychedelic ingestion may enhance physical or athletic performance. So, to me, you would just ask Diplo what he was trying to do.
Intention?
And yeah, like it's actually a big topic for me. Like, why have we not been asking athletes why they're using? For me, it's kind of like a politically dangerous thing to raise the profile of athletes using psychedelics. But that said, it's a really interesting story, and I think something that I would love to dig into more. I know a lot of X Games athletes are competing well under the influence of LSD, and fighters as well. Yeah,
and there's also the neuroprotective aspects as well, like MMA and boxing. Folks using functional mushrooms and maybe psilocybin-containing mushrooms just to protect the brain from impact.
Dan Engel's concussion repair manual. I'm really glad I read it before my head injury, and I would suggest anybody that's at risk of regular head injury read that book. One of the things I got, and I wish I did it, was Dan Engel suggests smoking cannabis right after impact, because it can prevent a decreased swelling, kind of help in a neuroprotective sense. I think that's really something folks should check out. And yeah, certainly I've been using psychedelics to help heal that brain injury as well. All right, I think that's enough of Diplo. And the final juicy article that we didn't leave enough time for, David. So, market battle lines are being drawn in psychedelics, but what are the warring camps really fighting about? This is a Rolling Stone article that was published somewhat recently, and it published March 27, so yesterday. And a lot of what was going on there was talking about the team's experience at Wonderland. I don't know, what were your kind of biggest takeaways from this article, David?
Yeah, one point that I want to make is that it's oversimplifying it to say there's two camps. So there's not just the medicalization camp and the decrim camp. I think I belong to both camps. I think both have a place to play, but there's just so many other camps. And some of them are competing, but some of them are actually more complementary. They can coexist. And I think just it's probably not great just to oversimplify it. So the article itself could have gone into a bit more detail, I feel, on quite a number of different angles. It didn't really kind of get to the nexus of what the argument is about here. It's talking about ownership and accessibility, kind of who gets to control or define who owns this. And there was one piece around Dr. Ros Watts from England, and how she had a change of heart from earlier being a little bit more kind of hype driven around, psychedelics and psilocybin to treat depression, amongst other things. And in her TED talk in 2017, and the article says in last year, she says, if I could go back in time, I would not now be so foolish to suggest that a synthesized capsule by itself can unlock depression. The greatest threat to a healthy psychedelic future is the fetishizing of just the drug alone. And the article does talk about that synthetic psilocybin and compass pathways, and are they going to make money? I think their stock price is down 90%, or Atai, the parent company, is down 90% from when it floated. So are they going to make back all of this money? We don't really know, and there is a conflict there around if decrim happens, if Oregon and Colorado happen, and they are, how does that affect the bottom line of companies like Compass Pathways that have all this IP in this kind of crystallized, synthesized psilocybin that is not going to be used in the Oregon model? So there is a bit of a conflict there. And, obviously I'm in a mood opposed to extractive capitalism right now. So the article goes into some of the IP grabs of certain companies. We're also talking about the IP grab that was happening with, was it Reunion, which was the Field Trip psilocybin drug development company, that they're suing Mindset Pharma. And I think that was to do with one of the Shulgin molecules that were going to be scheduled but didn't. And so Reunion is suing Mindset over this molecule. And, Compass was trying to get IP over all these things that, they perhaps shouldn't have. So I think the IP piece is very relevant here, amongst other things.
Do you have a few more minutes? Or do you have to wrap?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
So, obviously it's not great if somebody's patenting psilocybin, and that patent on psilocybin could theoretically block everybody else from doing psilocybin work in a research capacity or pharma capacity. The Compass thing was one quote unquote polymorph, one crystalline form of psilocybin, so it's not all psilocybin. And the thing about the couches that we really need to unpack that. Like, people in this scene do not understand IP at all, and we really need to unpack that more. So the couch story was we're going to patent soft furniture, really high quality speakers, all this stuff, like therapeutic touch-in sessions. Like, Compass got a lot of heat for that, but it's not that they were patenting those things. It's that they were describing the way in which their molecule would be used in therapy. So they're patenting the molecule and saying this patent applies to this method of us using it. We're not saying nobody else can use soft furniture or speakers. So there's just like a big and kind of willfully manipulated perception of what the IP situation here is, So further, I think, yes, it's ridiculous to think that a company, a 2022 or 23 company, can go and put patents on stuff that Sasha Shulgin created. I think the real trick is, will those things hold up in court? Because if there's what's called prior art, like it's been shown that this is the case elsewhere, or everybody knows this already. So there's like this whole thing around the patent has to be non-obvious or on something that's not obvious. Then, like, are they actually really going to be able to defend themselves in court when that time comes? Or is it a short-term stock price play? And your thing about Compass being 90% down, like, Of course. Like, why? Like, the hype cycle's dead. They've not been able to really sell anything. Same thing with Atai. They're in biotech drug development mode, right? Like, there's no reason why to think their stock price should be higher than it was, 2 years ago when it was peaking, right? So, like, it's a complex thing. Like, what I will always watch for, and I came at JR from MindMed pretty hard on this point. Like, are you going to use company funds to fight decriminalization and legalization efforts elsewhere? He didn't like that question. People can go listen to that episode. But, like, are companies going to be fighting against our interests with their earnings? And we don't know yet. There are some reasons to think that some of these companies will, but these companies need to know that we're going to come at them really hard if they do that. If you're, yeah.
Yeah, and there were stories coming out of Oregon a while back, a year or so ago, of psychedelic drug development company trying to prevent certain rules being made into the actual final framework for how the Oregon psilocybin service would be built out, because it would be a direct conflict with what they're planning on building out through their FDA clinical trials. So they were doing some lobbying behind the scenes and trying to get people to change their minds, not to kind of keep them out of the playing field there. So yeah, for me that's not cool. We need a level playing field. But I think with Oregon, I love that they're putting the emphasis on not synthesized, but botanical kind of real mushrooms, and then being standardized in that form. I just like that because it just keeps the power more in the community and in local growth.
And I think it's really actually not even legal to use synthesized. I think if you're going to have some sort of isolate, it would need to be extracted from the mushroom, which is pretty interesting. I forget the total rules around that, but we can get some experts on from Oregon to talk about that sooner than later. What I do recall is that the oral administration was the only route Oregon was allowing, which excludes a lot of populations from getting help, or a number of, I don't know about a lot, a number of different groups, stomach cancer people, people with stomach issues generally that just can't tolerate psilocybin orally. So, it's something we've got to think about. So, and this idea of psychedelics as panacea, like, obviously we should debunk that, but let's contextualize it appropriately, saying we should keep it illegal because it's, not a panacea doesn't seem like the logical position to take. Logical position in my mind is it's way safer than alcohol. Therefore, we shouldn't have laws against it, and we should figure out how to do appropriate education to keep people safe and hopefully safe supply. So, of course, it's disingenuous to say eat this chocolate bar for $100 and you're going to be fixed. It's like, maybe you actually need to do a lot more than that. Like, psychedelics will walk you to the door, but then you have to do a lot of fucking work afterwards. Yeah. Maybe even before.
Yeah. Yeah, and moving away from the hype and just getting the complexity of what we're talking about with psychedelic healing is massive. And just talking about Ros Watts again, she really for me is an amazing person that kind of just speaks to her truth. And so she went to the Psych Symposium in London last year, and she was kind of shocked. She was, I think, tweeting or posting on socials about, oh my God, like, I didn't think it would be like this. And she was really surprised about just how commercial it was, how much hype there was, just the amount of kind of corporate interest there. And, I'm going to Breaking Convention in England next month. So I'm really excited about that, being a bit more kind of, grungy and earthy and kind of grassroots. And I think there's place for both. But you need the question is, who is controlling the agenda, the policy agenda? And just the kind of the public agenda of what do people know and think? We don't want it to be hyped up like anyone can take psychedelics whenever they want and take as much, because they need to be well informed about that. But I just think the conversation is so much more nuanced than we've figured out yet. And that's why just saying that there's these two camps, there's more than two camps.
Right. Terence McKenna had this really great term, the balkanization of epistemology. And it's pretty much because media has fractured, because culture has been so fractured. There's no, not just 1, 2, or 5 ways of seeing the world. There's like hundreds now. And
and religion too.
Mm-hmm.
That's fractured.
Yeah, exactly. So, how are we to go forward? I think the appropriate thing to do is allow for a plurality of approaches here, and try to guide them skillfully and well, so that the most amount of people can get helped in a variety of ways. Not all humans need to go through these 3 wildly industrialized processes, right? Like, maybe that's not the right term for it, but a uniform process versus like, what if they want to work with a shaman or their friend, and not go to one of these centers. So how do we at the same time we're progressing the medicalization, improve drug laws and improve training elsewhere, and the availability of good therapists elsewhere, facilitators elsewhere. So, and safe supply, right? Like, without safe supply, we don't have much. Yeah. So there's a lot left to do here. And who are some groups working on this? We've got APA, right? We've got a UK version of that group, EU version of that group, working hard to follow suit with their own guidelines and regulations. APA, I know, is trying to be inclusive of religious approaches and kind of more non-traditional approaches. So I love that. But how do we balance this when the might of the American Psychiatric Association comes forward and says, this is ours? We've got to set the stage for that battle.
Yeah, I think that's what everyone's worried about, big pharma moving in, and we definitely are seeing that already. Mm-hmm. But yeah, ultimately, I think it has to coexist with decrim and legalization. I think we're going to see it eventually, and then I'm sure companies will be able to make money still with decrim and legalization happening. And if not, it means they have to change their business model, because you can't keep it illegal just because they can make money off it.
Right. It's not okay. It's not okay for you to put people in prison and in harm's way so you can make profits. That, in my opinion, is unethical, if I'm going to use that big E word that's confusing to me. Next up, let's wrap. I think, folks, if you want to check out Adam Strauss, his Mushroom Cure has gotten amazing reviews, April 7th and 8th in Santa Monica, California. Link is in our show notes. We've got this amazing neuroscience course coming up with Melanie Pincus and Manesh Gurn, both amazing neuroscientists and really, really skilled instructors. So check that out. You can learn more about that at psychedelicEducationCenter.com. And stay tuned. We're going to be up to some really cool stuff over the next few months. I know Convergence is off. Vital's about to kick off really soon too. It's going to be extraordinary. So just really excited for the next year, David. Thanks for everything you've done on Vital. I know it's been a lot.
Yeah, I've loved it. It's a lot of work, man. But I've probably met like 200 students now, at least, and God, they're just amazing people. I know I talk about it all the time, but that's why I'm kind of anti-capitalist this week, because these are just people doing amazing work all over the world. They're seeing a local need and they're filling that gap, whether it's legal or not. So they want kind of competence. They want harm reduction skills and integration skills because they're doing that work already. They're filling a gap there. It's just beautiful to meet this many awesome people, and we're graduating our first bunch of students on April the 11th. So that's going to be a really beautiful 2-hour ceremony on Zoom.
That's outstanding. That's awesome. I can't wait to give more of them a platform. So it's gonna happen for sure. And I loved meeting them as well at some of the retreats. So it's just really great to see it in person. Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you, David. Thank you to all the listeners out there. And we will do this again sooner than later. Actually, I think we will skip next. Well, actually, No, we will do next week. Awesome. Yeah, we recorded this early enough, so everything's on schedule. So, yeah. Ignore all that, everybody, and we'll see you next time. All right.
Take care, everyone. God bless.
Yeah. Bye-bye.